And hi again, everybody. Welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles, Don Henderson with you as we do this on a post-Memorial Day weekend on Tuesday night. We're going to talk a lot of baseball on our show and bring on our first guest right away. He's a good friend of the publishers that bring on so many great guests, Triumph Books, and he's got a great new one out called Unwritten, Bat Flips, the Fun Police, and Baseball's New Future. We're joined by Danny Nobler, National Lead Major League Baseball writer for Bleacher Report, and he's covered baseball for more than 30 years, and he joined us by telephone tonight. And Danny, good to have you with us. How are you?
Hey guys, it's good to be here. Feeling good. Ready to talk about baseball. A little ways into this season, a lot going on already, including a lot with the unwritten rules.
Well, I'm going to say, Danny, you picked out an interesting subject because there are a lot of unwritten rules, and it'd be nice to talk to you and get the origin. I've followed baseball for a long time. I recognize a lot of the unwritten rules, but I can't tell you where they actually came from.
Well, that's I don't know that anyone actually can pinpoint where things came from, because basically what the unwritten rules are is the way it's accepted that the game should be played, the way the players should act on the field, what they can do, what they can't do. And that kind of has developed over time, and it changes over time. It changes along with the culture of the game. It changes with the players in the game. It certainly changed with the game becoming more international and become the players becoming younger. And it's changed with just our culture having changed. The way I've told it to people, if you watch games from the 1950s, tapes of games from the 1950s, you see all the fans showing up wearing ties and wearing top hats. And, we don't do that anymore.
Doug?
Yeah, no, I guess the main one that seems to have been in the last few years of baseball that have caused the most problems, and that's part of the title of your book, is the bat flips after home runs. In the old days, if you did that, I don't think players even thought of doing that then, but if they did, even by mistake, they would have gotten one next to the ear from the next pitch. But that seems to be the one that's most recent, right? The bat flip?
Yeah, I think that's the topic that gets talked about the most right now. And it's the one that probably brings up the most issues right now. We had one earlier this year with Tim Anderson of the White Sox. And he flipped his bat up after a home run against the Royals. And the Royals didn't appreciate it, and they threw at him. Now, they didn't throw up near his head like, as you said, it might have happened in the past. They hit him on the butt. But he didn't appreciate that. And the teams went on the field and had a little conversation about it, a little more. But those things do happen, and the best way to describe that is that there's no question that it's changed, that bat flips and celebrations are much more acceptable and much more accepted than they were in the past. But what happens was, as with any change in life, in sports, in anything, there's always going to be some resistance. And the resistance is what you see when you see pitchers sometimes throwing at a hitter who they feel disrespected them by flipping his bat. Now, there's any game you watch now, you're liable to see a bat flip. Most of them don't end up with the hitter getting thrown out the next time. But once in a while it does. It still happens.
Well, the only one that I think everybody is familiar with, and yet I have no recollection of where the origin was, and it was in the 40s, it was in the 30s, and it's right now. They don't step on the baseline when they come out. They step over the baseline as they go into the field.
Yeah, that's true. And it's just a matter of superstition. That's kind of it's been true in baseball and probably in other sports too, that players and coaches and managers, superstitions develop over time, and that's one that has been, I think you're right, around as long as baseball's been around. And every now and then you'll have a player who intentionally does step on the line because that's his superstition, that he's going to break that other superstition with a superstition of his own. But yes, you're right. That is a superstition that has been around forever.
I know you talk in the book about the Alex Rodriguez going across the mound. I mean, that was a big deal when he did that, and that's really an unwritten rule. But I've never seen anybody do it before, and Rodriguez does it, and he's known to be a kind of a hot dog anyway. But that was a huge brouhaha, wasn't it?
And yeah, it was, and it became that in large part because Dallas Braden happened to be the pitcher for the A's that day, and he took offense to it and brought it up again after the game, and then Alex Rodriguez had some things to say about Braden, that Braden hadn't won that many games and shouldn't be talking, and then of course Braden threw a no-hitter later, and said, well, maybe he did deserve to be talking, and it's something that you don't see very often because most players, I think, understand that they're not supposed to do that. And Alex had a tendency to do things his own way, as I think any of us knew. And in that one day, I don't know if he ever did that any other time, but that one day he happened to run across the mound, and Dallas Braden happened to take offense to it. And yeah, it became an unwritten rule that people didn't even know was an unwritten rule, and I think some players didn't even think of as. But if you watch any game, you never see any other player do it, so you pretty much knew whether the players thought of it as an unwritten rule or not. They kind of knew they weren't supposed to do that.
Well, I think the other thing too that has really transcended right on from the 40s and 30s and 20s, and that is that you don't bunt when you're ahead by more than so many runs, and you certainly don't steal bases when you're ahead by so many runs. But that's sort of been put aside now because of the fact that there's so much offense in the game, and each run counts so much more than it did maybe 10, 15 years ago. So some of those old rules that were rules are now being put aside.
Well, that's an interesting point, and there's a lot of discussion about that. I bring that up in the book. When is it acceptable to still run? And teams don't run as much as they used to in any case. You don't see as many stolen bases, or very rarely see a hit and run play. But it does come up. I bring up a third base coach saying that when his team has a big lead, he doesn't even like to send a runner home unless it's obvious that he's going to be safe. And part of that is, in a lopsided game, the last thing you want to do is get someone hurt. Not that there's very many collisions at the plate anymore anyway because of the rules on that. But the last thing you want to do is get someone hurt. But you also don't want there's a long feeling, and not just in baseball, but in other sports too. People talk in football about throwing deep if you have a big lead. There's a feeling about don't rub it in someone's face when you're beating it, because it'll come back to bite you. That if it's fine, it's a competitive game, you're playing to win, but once you have a large lead, don't try to embarrass the other team. That's kind of been the feeling. Now, as you said, with the home runs that are hit in today's game, what is a big enough lead that you're not going to, that you don't worry about the other team coming back from? That's a great question, and it's one that is debated regularly among baseball people.
Danny Nobler is our guest. The book is called Unwritten, Bat Flips, the Fun Police, and Baseball's New Future. And Danny, I know you interviewed a lot of the players that are currently playing the game, and between veterans and young players, obviously there's probably different thoughts, even the veteran players from the younger players now of the unwritten rules. What did you gather from talking to some of those players, the older players first?
Well, it's interesting how that works. There are differences. It's not a strict young-old thing. For example, I think in general, young players are less willing or less likely to see a pitcher throwing at someone as something that should be part of the game. But that you will find older players who don't think that, and you'll find young players who are fine with it. So it's not strictly young-old. The other thing that young versus old has definitely changed in the game is that it's not that long ago, even 10, 15 years ago, young players came into the major leagues and they were expected to, in the clubhouse, basically stay in their lane, sit down and watch. We want to be seen and not heard. Right. And keep your mouth shut and watch, learn how to play the game. And then once you've been around for a little while, you can take your place and talk. And that's really gone away, to a very large extent. That young players come into the game now much more with a sense that they already belong. And I think even some of the older players in today's game, CC Sabathia for one, think that that's a very good thing, that's a great change that's happening. But there's always going to be some changes. There's also, and it's not, again, not strictly young versus old, but I think in general, if you look at who's most likely to flip the bat, who's most likely to show a little more flair in the field, it's more likely to be a younger player than an older player. It's not only that, but there is a little bit of divide on that.
I think another thing that has changed the clubhouse too is that the shifting of personnel. So many people go up and down. And for instance, we talk about the Yankees. You live in New York, you know about the Yankees, and I mean they bring players up, and sometimes they'll bring 2 and 3 and 4 players up at a time, and send 3 or 4 down for 10 days or whatever length of time. So that changes the whole complexion of the clubhouse.
Very much so, and that's happened more and more. Teams, you technically have a 25-man roster, but in reality, you have more closer to a 30-man roster, because one of the things that teams have understood, especially in the bullpen, but even among their extra position players, is that the value of having guys with options, and also the number of players are going to go on the injured list. They call it now, it used to be the disabled list. But you're going to need more players over the course of the year. You don't go through the season. Everybody, it's always funny, I think, at the end of spring training, everybody talks about who made the team and who didn't make the team and make the opening day roster. And then 3 days into the season, as you said, they sent 2 guys down and brought 2 more guys up. And did it really matter what they chose for the opening day roster?
Exactly. Well, they may, they think, especially if you're playing in the Northeast, chances are you're not going to need 5 pitchers, definitely in the first month to 6 weeks of the season. So that's a spot you can always shuffle people in and out. The other thing was there was always a superstition, not only in baseball but elsewhere, you wouldn't wear the number 13. But that sort of vanished, I'd say, about 20 years ago, and 13 has now not become an unlucky number.
You're right. No, there's a lot of players who've worn that, and players who've done very well wearing it. And I think there's probably still some that would regard it as unlucky and wouldn't wear it. But you're right. On any team now, it's not a surprise anymore to see somebody wearing 13.
Well, I think it's sort of funny that you get in an elevator and it goes from 12 to 14.
That's very funny. Yeah. Like, wait a minute.
You don't think of it in that context.
Yeah, you're on that floor after 12, and just because it says 14 on it, it's not unlucky.
Exactly, and
right?
It just shows you how people have had this instilled in them for so many years, and now that it's amazing how you get on an elevator, nobody realizes you're really on the 13th floor.
Yeah, it's true, and as you said, baseball goes along in a lot of ways with whatever society is thinking. And the same way the hotel's thinking we don't want a 13th floor, and for a long time, baseball players were thinking, I don't want to wear number 13. And,
right.
But you're right, a lot of that has changed.
Danny, had a chance living down here in Tampa Bay. We've covered the Lightning for many years, and you go in the dressing room, and boy, if you make a mistake of stepping on the logo in the middle of the dressing room, you heard about it from the players. Is it the same way in baseball? They have superstitions and unwritten in the locker room?
They do. That's much more of a hockey thing.
Right.
In fact, it's funny sometimes you'll see hockey people come into a baseball clubhouse and wonder about stepping on a logo. And in baseball, it's not nearly thought of the same way. The same way that I was watching the Stanley Cup final, and they were showing a picture of when the Blues won the Western Conference, and of course in the NHL, nobody touches the trophy for the conference championship.
Trophy, right? You don't want to go near it.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas in baseball, nobody really thinks about the National League and American League trophies, but nobody's running away from them. Everybody's thinking, okay, we're proud to won that league and get to the World Series. And there's no similar superstition about that in baseball. But they have their own. They have other superstitions, but not that one.
Danny, what's the one that surprised you the most that maybe we haven't touched on, but you did your research and said, geez, I never really believed that was a superstition or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of the things I heard totally surprised me. I think that some of the things, I spent a lot of time talking about whether retaliation is okay. And one of the things I thought was interesting, we'll go through two different things. One, that Earl Weaver didn't believe in having his pitchers ever throw at anyone in retaliation. And we think of that as a new thing. We think of old Earl Weaver as very old school. But Earl Weaver believed in what he believed, and he believed that if he got in a beanball war and there was a fight that developed, all it was going to do was hurt the Orioles because he had better players, and if he lost any of his players, he was losing somebody who was really good, and he didn't want to do that. He would rather just play you straight up. That was
especially pitchers. He had a ton of good pitchers.
Yes, he did, and he didn't want any of them suspended, thrown out of a game. And you see now pitchers, and one of the things I think is interesting is the number of pitchers now who say, I don't mind how a guy celebrates. And obviously that's not totally true, or we would never have any of these fights or guys getting hit after they flip the bat. But more pitchers now say, that's okay, they can do that, and the hitter should understand that I might celebrate when I get them, when I strike them out. Or you have a situation, Kenley Jansen, the great closer for the Dodgers, who said, a guy can celebrate all he wants because the mere fact that he hit a home run off me, I already want to strike him out the next time I face him, and that's how I'm going to get him back. And it doesn't matter whether he celebrates or doesn't celebrate. The fact that he hit a home run off me, I'm going to get him back. But I'm not going to get him back by throwing at him because I don't want an extra base runner. I'm going to get him back by striking him out.
Who was the first guy to do the bat flip or admire? I'm thinking it's got to be Reggie, right? He did that a lot in the 70s.
Reggie never really flipped his bat.
No, he kind of stood and admired it, right? Watched it.
Yes, he definitely
First
did
baseman
that.
for the Philadelphia Phillies was the one that actually got more publicity for flipping the bat than anybody else.
Montanez? Willie Montanez?
Yes. Willie Montanez.
Okay, I remember him, yeah.
Well, and there's a famous bat flip from the 1987 World Series by a guy who nobody would have thought would be a guy who was going to do it. Was Tom Lawless. Hit a home run for the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series, and it was a major bat flip. and it surprised everybody at the time. And I write about it in the book, and I say it's not. I don't think it was the first bat flip, but it might have been the first one that got a lot of attention. And nobody threw at it, but it definitely got talked about. But there were things, you talk about Reggie, and there's no question that hitters from that era started admiring home runs. Because if you go back further than that, and even now you'll hear guys say, get on, don't stand there, go around the bases. But there were definitely guys starting in the 70s probably who would stand and admire a home run. Not so much flip the bat, but stand there and watch it. And that in its own era got pitchers sometimes as upset. Although one of the things, and I write about this too, a player like Reggie, who hit as many home runs as he did and established himself the way he did, was much more likely to be able to get away with that than if it were a guy who never hit any home runs. And that's still true today. Garrett Cole, who pitches for the Astros, said even though he said he admires guys who don't do it at all, guys like Aaron Judge, but he said, if it's a guy who's hit a lot of home runs and he wants to do that, you know what, I can deal with it. But it's the guy who is, he's hit 2 home runs a season and he wants to show off. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, what's that?
Well, the other thing, Danny, too, is that just from a cultural standpoint, there was a lot more latitude with Latin American players, and for them it's a little bit of a show. It's not just a game of baseball; it's a little bit of a show, and more of them in the early days. I don't say necessarily today, but more of them had more of a tendency to stand and look or flip the bat or things like that.
Yeah, well, part of that is if you ever watch a Winter League game from Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico or back when Venezuela had a strong Winter League or Colombia, Panama, you'll see lots more of that. And
that's right.
From players all over. And it's I don't think we're ever going to get to the point, nor should we, where a game in Yankee Stadium is going to look the same as a game in Santo Domingo. However,
Right.
or a game in the Tokyo Dome for that matter. However, the influx of players from Latin America and from Asia is going to change the game. And it's not going to completely change it, but the game is a much more international game. If you go back 40, 50 years, there were some Latin American players, but there might be one or two per team. And I quote Juan Semo in the book about saying when he got to the Phillies, you had to be a little bit more cautious on how you acted because there weren't.
The first one I can recall was Louis Omo when he played for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1944. Louis Omo was one of the first players to come in and play on a full-time basis in the major leagues that I can remember.
And if you came in at that time, you're going to be much more cautious on how you act because you're by yourself and you're making now.
Correct.
If you get a team with 10 Latin players on it and they're in a group, no question they're going to feel more of an ability, more of an acceptance of playing with a little bit more of the flair that they play with at home. And even with that, players will still tell you that they have to learn how to play here. I talked to Yasiel Puig, who came from Cuba, and he talks about how when he got here, and he didn't have the benefit of having grown up, signing at 16 like a lot of the players from Dominican or Venezuela do, where he would come through the minor leagues and be educated in the American version of the game. He came over, he had a very short time in the minor leagues, and he was in the big leagues because of having just left Cuba and because of the talent he had. And he had to understand at first what was going to be acceptable, what was going to, and he does some things that are going to be more than other people do, but what he could do that was really going to get people upset, and what lines there were to draw, and he learned that over the course of time, and I think American players do too, players in the Dominican do too, but the difference is that they spend more time in the minor leagues, where a lot of that is taught and learned.
Right. Danny, I know we kept you longer than we said, but I just want to get your thoughts, and I guess, Don, you'll agree, just maybe a minute or two on Bill Buckner, who we lost over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, he was a great player. I grew up in Los Angeles. I was a Dodger fan as a kid in that era when Bill Buckner was playing, and I certainly remember him as a really, really outstanding hitter, outstanding player. And, of course, yes, his name is always going to be associated with the 86 World Series. And I know people have said it's unfair that that's brought up all the time. But whether it's unfair or not, I think it's realistic that that's going to happen because it was a huge play. At the same time, I think Bill Buckner gained tons of respect around the game from people who didn't know him as well for the way he handled that over the years and the way that he eventually went back to Boston and threw out a first pitch, the way he embraced Mookie Wilson and they became friends. And I think the tributes to Bill Buckner after he died were indicative of how people felt about him and the way he carried himself as a player, but also just that he was a really talented player who deserved that kind of respect.
Well, they made a comment or a point last night on Major League Baseball, which I hadn't realized at the time, but I should have, that in all the years that he played, and I think it was 21 or 22, I can't remember the exact number, he never struck out 3 times in a game. And he was a contact. He was a contact batter. He was well, it's like Joe DiMaggio. You know, Joe DiMaggio and the year he won the most valuable player and beat Ted Williams. That he only struck out 13 times in the whole year.
Right.
which is hard to believe. But one last point about your book, and that is that if you're not old enough, you grew up in L.A. Number one, and number two, maybe Doug does, but once a week they used to show the Latin American game on Channel 9 all winter, and so you got a chance to look at a lot of Latin American players, and so necessarily when they came to the major leagues, you knew who they were. They don't do too much of that anymore, but they still put some games on.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll tell you what, I've been to a game in Santo Domingo and San Pedro de Macorís. Anybody who loves baseball, who has a chance ever during the winter to go down and watch a game or two in those places in Dominican or in Puerto Rico, it's a great experience. Same as I've been to games in Tokyo. Anybody who has a chance to go see a game there, it's a great, great experience. It's a different atmosphere than we get at the games here, but it's a lot of fun.
No argue with the umpires there. They
No, they
argue
don't.
with umpires.
Unwritten, bat
You
flips.
got it, Doug. You can close it out.
I was going to say, Unwritten, Bat Flips, The Fun Police and Baseball's New Future is the full title of the book. And we've been talking with Danny Nobler today, published by our friends at Triumph Books. I guess that's the best place, and all the bookstores have it, right, Danny?
Absolutely, yeah. It should be available in all bookstores. You can find it on Amazon. You can follow me on Twitter at Danny Nobler, Knobler, or the Facebook page, Danny Nobler Author. And if you can't find it anywhere, you send me a message. I'll find a way to make sure you get it.
Great. Danny, thanks for taking the time, and we'll definitely do it again down the road. But thanks for joining us tonight.
Okay, guys, it's been fun.
Take care. Take care.